Social justice, compassion, and charity are some of the pillars of Jewish life and society. The eternal words of the prophets of Israel continuously call out to take care of the poor, the widow, and the orphan, to take care of those who can't take care of themselves. Here's the greatest philanthropist in human history. He's given $4.5 billion in vaccines, $2 billion in scholarships in America, $1.5 billion to improve farming in Africa. His foundation is as big as the largest companies in America, almost as big as McDonald's, and surpasses the Boeing Corporation. It's Bill Gates. Listen to what he has to say about why he's giving 90% of his wealth away.
Well, if you have money, what are you going to do with it? You can spend it on yourself. You can have, thousands of people holding fans and cooling you off. You can build pyramids and things. I sometimes order 2 cheeseburgers instead of 1.
Bill Gates is a generous man, and while we'd be proud to call him one, he's not a Jew. What is the Jewish contribution to the concept of charity? How does Jewish tradition weigh on the issue? How do Jews weigh in on the issue? Well, according to most statistics, Jews are the most charitable demographic in the world. Business Weekly, the Chronicle of Philanthropy, all consider Jews make up 2% of the U.S. population, and they represent around 30% of America's most generous donors. And don't go thinking that it's all going to other Jews and Jewish causes. Among the mega donors, at least, only 6% of their charitable donations went to Jewish causes. We'll tackle these issues and many more on this week's Israel Inspired.
And now, live from Jerusalem, you're listening to Israel Inspired Radio. Here are your hosts, Rabbis Ari Abramowitz and Jeremy Gimpel.
Jeremy, it's good to be here. How you doing?
Doing great. How are you?
I'm doing fantastically. I'll tell you, to start this show, we wanted to talk about not just the idea of tzedakah, about charity, but from the micro to the most macro level. And I think that's what's exciting about our times and the challenges we're facing as a nation, to infuse the character of the state of Israel with Jewish values. And this whole journey isn't really about the ends, just the struggle of identity is a beautiful one.
Well, I would say more than micro to macro, I would say it's almost internal to external. Meaning, what does tzedakah do for that individual person that there's a mitzvah on them to do it? And at the same time, we're trying to change outer society and help the poor, etc. So more than micro and macro, there's also a dimension of internal and external.
Right, that's true. Well, I'll tell you, I had a thought about this issue yesterday when I was walking. I did a lot of walking around Jerusalem yesterday. We did a lot of walking around Jerusalem yesterday. It was a fun time. We don't really get the opportunity to walk around the whole city that much. And I'll tell you, how many people were cheering for us? It was like there was some conspiracy everywhere we went. There was my favorite guy, you know who my favorite was.
The guy was across the street.
Yeah, he was like, Ha'am, Doresh, Tuesday Night Live, Ha'am, Doresh. Well, the nation demands Tuesday Night Live. The nation demands Ari and Jeremy. And he wouldn't stop cheering that, jumping up and down cheering that. Everywhere we went, people were like really giving us shout outs. Yeah. It was heartwarming. But I had a thought when I was walking. I just came back from a trip and I had some maaser, some tithes, money to give to tzedakah. And there was someone that was there asking for money, someone begging for money. So I gave them money and he was so appreciative, extraordinarily so. And I walked away feeling so warm and fuzzy inside. This is not a unique experience. This is why people give, because to some degree, on some level, it's not just altruistic. There's a fuzzy warmth that we get because of the nature. It does good for your soul. It does. And but I had this sort of thought that who was really giving who the charity, right? Because in some way, if we want to be close to God, and the way to really on a spiritual level be close to God is being similar to God, well, God gives. So if we're able to be givers too, then we're able to partake and be sort of a vessel for the divine in the world. And that's like a very deep connection. That's a concept that I repeat again and again. But if he wasn't there, if there were no poor people, then how would we be able to do that? In some way, they're giving to us.
Yeah, I think one of the most amazing revelations of the Hebrew Bible is that, first of all, that the creator of the universe cares about man. Why should the cosmos and the universe, why should he care about this little like human beings that are wandering around the world? But not only that he cares about humanity, of all of the people that concern God, it's not the kings or the astronauts or the astrophysicists. He cares about the poor and the downtrodden. And I think one of the revolutions of Judaism is to be able to partner with God as he cares for those poor people, to not only be close to him in that he gives and that we give, but to partner in his desire to help those poor people and partner with God in his deepest desires of helping them.
Right. And that's why, I was in Hungary and I was speaking to this mega pastor. Fascinating conversation. And, I was sharing sort of our show about Einstein and energy and everything is energy. And he asked the question, he says, but that God is so impersonal, and it was a really good question he asked. And I think the right answer to that is not to physicalize everything and make everything material, but say if God is his attributes in the world, then what more intimate relationship is there with God than to be a vehicle for his light? That's the ultimate. Literally, it's to be infused with godliness by doing godly things. And that's why we're here. And that's why the most painful existential experience is to do the reverse.
That's a fascinating conversation, because I think what that pastor put his finger on is exactly the unique message of the Jewish people, where Einstein and a lot of the quantum mechanic physicists, they believe in God, and they see the intricate structure of the universe and they say, like, this was just design. How could it be otherwise? But they do not believe in a personal God. They believe in E equals MC squared, this energy of oneness that unifies the universe in a unified theory, but they can't wrap their mind around how that could potentially have an interaction, personal relationship with humanity. Where on the other side of the spectrum is, let's say, Christianity, who absolutely has taken the personal relationship with God and made it very real in their life, but they've sort of distanced themselves from the oneness of the universe and an abstract God as well, where Judaism has taken both of those ideas, which both of them are true, and brought them into one. And that is the revolution of Jewish thought.
We're talking about bridging the East to the West, and in some cases it's exactly that. We need to be providing that bridge, and that's really what Abraham did, v'hashavota el vavecha, that he was able to internalize. But people can't internalize if we don't bring those together. That's pretty insightful. But I'll tell you that what we're even talking about right now, the whole concept of charity, everybody's got their thing, right? The thing that they do to feel connected, to feel that warm, fuzzy feeling, to feel like they're serving God, whatever it is. In my family, growing up, my father, and I imagine that his father before him and his father going generations back, my father's thing is tzedakah. It's always tzedakah, 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 tzedakah. That's what it is to be a Jew. One of the main tenets of Judaism. So I remember growing up, my dad would, people knock on the door and they come in and they're asking for money, right? So my dad would call me into the room and the person would be there telling about the cause, and my father would investigate. And then my father would pull out his checkbook and he would write a check, and he wanted me to see the check. And I remember when I saw the check, it was like, oh, what are you doing? Are you crazy? That's a Nintendo. That's a Nintendo and a Sega Genesis. And that's what I've been begging you for. I've been begging you for months for this Nintendo, and now you're giving this check to that guy.
Well, that's funny.
I remember thinking, I was like, what are you doing? And he wanted me to see that, to feel that. And then the guy would leave, and I would say, why did you do that? He says, because Jews give tzedakah.
Can I digress for a moment?
Yeah,
Could you
please.
please tell the story of your grandfather about
one?
There was one person in the community who wasn't giving tzedakah?
Oh, I love that story.
Isn't that a great story? You
yes.
have to tell that story.
So my grandfather recorded his own obituary, right? He recorded his own obituary, and he wanted it to be played at his funeral because I don't think he thought anyone else could really do justice to him. There was a guy that my grandfather would nudge to give tzedakah, to give to the state of Israel, and the guy was just not a big giver. And let's say his name was Paul Reeser, okay? And so in the obituary, he knew Paul Reeser would be there, and he said, and I want to thank my good friend Paul Reeser for his very generous donation to the Jewish, to the state of Israel of $25,000. Paul, thank you so much. I love that.
Yeah,
that's a great story. Just the idea of him recording his own obituary. But my father would always say what's the guideline for giving tzedakah? Because he wasn't necessarily so, Judaically educated on like an intellectual level, even though he had the education to know that he wanted me to be, so he sent me to get an education. But he said, what do Jews give? They give until it hurts. They give until it hurts. I'll never forget that. You got to give until it hurts. I don't know if I would necessarily say that because I don't want to associate pain with giving tzedakah. But on the other hand, the sentiment is made.
The point is made.
The sentiment is made. Yes, it's an important one. And I think it's part of the Jewish collective consciousness. And we'll get into a reason as to why. But I was just looking here on a list of Jerusalem gemachs. What is a gemach?
Gemilut Chasadim.
Gemilut Chasadim. It's a centralized place where certain kindness or compassion is done. You'll hear the different gemachs that they have here. This is just a number of them. For mourning, if your family member dies, you don't have money to bury them. There's a special gemach for that. For birth supplies, children's clothing, boxes, breast pumps, a bris, cameras, car seats, cell phones, clothing, DVD, eyeglasses, fax service, food, weddings, library, loans, pharmacy, sleeping accommodations, tables and chairs, tools. I mean, it goes on and on. I'm just going to stop here because it just shows what a fundamental part of Jewish society kindness and compassion is.
And that's on the level of a city. It's not just a community that's a congregation. That's the Jewish people as a society and a city are living with institutions that are there taking care of all of those needs of all of those other people. I think, one of the brilliant revolutions of Jewish consciousness in tzedakah is, we spoke about Bill Gates earlier. Obviously, the guy is historic in what he's doing with his money and how much money he made, and the fact that he's giving so much of it away is tremendous. But I think the revolution of Judaism is that tzedakah is not an act of rich people. Everyone has to give tzedakah. Even poor people have to give tzedakah to people that are poorer than them. Exactly.
Yes. Meaning it should always be if you get if I give $1 to a poor person, he's giving a dime of that to tzedakah, and the person that gets the dime is giving the penny.
Right.
To tzedakah.
Exactly. And so some people say that this Jewish idea of charity has almost spawned the democratic movement in America, that Jews love the idea of social welfare and love the idea of taking care of the poor, that they've almost said, well, that's what the Democrats do. And so many Jews have sided on the left side because of their internal desire to want to take care of the poor.
Right, or that could be a potential argument, right?
What's interesting, though, is that in Judaism, it's never governmental. Tzedakah is an individual responsibility. It's not given to the king or to the government to take care of the poor. It's given on you to establish these gmachim as individuals to take care of each other and to not delegate that responsibility to a higher authority.
I would have to disagree with you.
Okay.
It is not governmentally determined, but it is biblically determined on a governmental level, meaning what's different in America that actually takes all the fun and beauty out of the charity, the way America is sort of, I think, progressing on some level. Obama and Obamacare and the way that people say it's like socialism. I'm not saying it's like socialism. I'm not saying it's not. That's not the issue here. The issue is whether it's an act of free will. The minute it's governmentally coerced, it's no longer a beautiful thing. It has to be an act of free will. But there is in Judaism ma'aser oni and ma'aser sheni, tzedakah that you give to the Kohanim and tzedakah that you give to the poor, but that's directly from you to them. It's not like there is a governmental middleman that is, aggregating the money and taking commissions and whatever.
Exactly.
So there's really no self-interest on any party in this happening, which is interesting because you'd think if a man were to write the Torah, it would be full of self-interested ways for him to get rich. Yeah, but this is not an issue of control at all.
Right.
But I want to get to a little bit of why, I think stories that people have about their culture and their societies, they sort of reflect the values of a people. And when you look at the Torah, especially the book of Genesis, full of stories. And there are a few stories I was raised on. You mentioned, you know this one also, the story about Reichman,
sure,
the very wealthy man and his socks, right? So bottom line is he passed away, left $1 billion, and he left 2 wills, one to be opened immediately and one to be opened 30 days later. And the one to be opened immediately told his children that he wanted to be buried, very important, he wanted to be buried with his favorite pair of socks, wearing his favorite pair of socks. And while this was a strange demand, his kid said, okay, if that's what he wants, that's what... So they went and they told the Chevra Kadisha, the Jewish Burial Society, bury him with his socks. And they said, we can't do that. That's against Jewish law. And they said, well, you got to. This is he was a very righteous man, a learned... Please, no, we will not do that. And then they went even to the Jewish courts and they said, this was his request. He was such a generous man to all your causes, to these institutions. And the court said, he's in the world of truth now. And he would know, he would not want to be buried with his socks. The answer is no. So they were really upset about him. They buried him without his socks. And 30 days later, they opened up the other will. And what did it say? It had a letter that said, my dear children, by now you must have buried me without my socks. I wanted you to truly understand that a man can have $1 billion, but in the end, he can't even take along one pair of socks. Is that a great story?
I love that story.
I love that story.
It's a great story.
And it's just a reflection. It's not just you or I that know that story. That's just the story that Jews know about Reichman and his socks.
Right. I don't even know if it's a true story, but it's such a legend that it doesn't matter anymore because the point is made.
It doesn't matter whether it's a true story or not.
Right.
The idea that the fact that it is such a prevalent story that we all value so much shows that it's something that touches a nerve deep within the Jewish collective consciousness.
Well, I'll tell you why there's so many stories about tzedakah in Jewish thought.
Well, let me just tell you one last story.
Oh, sure.
One last story, and then I want to hear why
No,
you're...
take it.
The Queen of England, she went to Sir Moses Montefiore, right, the big philanthropist, we all know about him, and she asked him, what is the extent of your wealth? How much do you own? And he said he would need to do some accounting, and he came back and he told her a number. And the Queen said, this is offensive. Everyone knows that you have far greater wealth than that. And he went on to explain that his true wealth is whatever money he had given to tzedakah. Anything else he possessed was only temporary, and it could be confiscated or lost. His true wealth, it's like when you give tzedakah, that's banked. Money could lose its value, it could be inflated,
It could be taken away.
It could be taken away. That's all up for grabs. The minute you give 10%, that ratio of giving, that amount, that I guess the way my dad would say, that pain of giving, that's yours. That's yours forever.
Yeah, that's banked in heaven. It can never be taken away, and it's just gaining interest.
Right.
It's like there, and it's there, and it will never be taken away. No one can take it away from you. I think it's true. I think one.
So tell me why. Why is that? Yeah.
So there's an amazing Jewish philosopher, fighter. He was one of the heads of the Lehi, the Lochamei Cherut Israel, of the freedom fighters of Israel that established sovereignty here in the land of Israel in 1948 as they fought off the British. There were three groups, underground groups. One was the Haganah, one was the Etzel, and the final one was the Lehi. And the Lehi were seen as the most radical, the most left-wing, the most, they were freedom fighters.
I wouldn't even say left-wing. It's too loaded a term.
Right. Well, anyway.
I'm not disagreeing. Okay, go ahead.
They were the revolutionaries. And so Dr. Israel Eldad was the philosopher of the movement, and he taught an amazing idea that said that the word crisis in Hebrew doesn't exist. The word crisis is a foreign concept. In Hebrew, the word for crisis is mashber. But mashber literally means in Hebrew the moment of birth. So the purpose of a crisis in Jewish thought is saying it's not a crisis at all. It's an opportunity. It's the moment of birth. And when we see someone that's in need of tzedakah, we would see a crisis at hand. There's poor people in the world. But in Jewish thought, intrinsic within the Hebrew language, it's not a crisis, a tragedy, a disaster. It's a moment of birth. It's a moment of opportunity where anyone can now use their free will to now partake in a redemptive process. They can see a poor person and turn that mashber, that crisis, into a mashber, into the beginning of a birth of something miraculous. And that is the secret, I believe, of Jewish survival, that we never had the idea of a crisis. Crisis after crisis that we've lived through, if it was the Crusades, the Inquisition, the pogroms, the Holocaust, always gave birth to something greater than preceded it. And the Jewish people lived with a consciousness that every uncomfortable position, every crisis seemingly in front of us is an opportunity for tzedakah.
I think you're right, but I think one other element of it that may be a little bit more subconscious than we would be aware of is the concept that we're all charity cases. If there's any nation or people that is one collective charity case, it's the Jewish people. Why? Every single time we've had a real battle, a real war, we're always extraordinarily outnumbered. You remember the story in the Tanakh where Gideon, there were 30,000 Jews, 130,000 Assyrians. No, send them home, and send home so many until 300 were left. Why did? And then God says, because otherwise you may think that it was your own power, your own strength, your own might that brought you this victory. And of course it's not. And when you look at Jewish history, the fact we're here in Israel is a charity case. We are all charity case. And I think the more we internalize that and come to peace with that, the happier we're going to be. Is the word charity cases. Even the people that have the money, they can say, I worked hard for this money. I think about how many people are extraordinarily talented, gifted businessmen, and just a bad deal. Bad things happened, someone corrupt, they were blackmailed, and they don't have the money. Even wealthy people that earn their own money, it's a dangerous thing having that wealth.
Sure.
It's not a bad thing, but it's a dangerous thing.
Right.
Because it's
Big
very
responsibility.
easy, and it's a big responsibility, but it's very easy to get confused and feel like you're powerful, like you're the one that did it and you've got it. And
Well, I think also something else, meaning why is tzedakah so central in Jewish thought? I think one of the reasons is that Judaism on one hand calls for us to fix the world. And it calls for us, if we see an injustice, to go out and mend that problem, fix the world and partner with God in bringing us to the next stage of human development, of world development, ultimately bringing us towards the redemption. But at the same time, Judaism calls us more than to change the world outside of us, to change the world inside of us. And there's a halacha in Jewish thought that says if you have an opportunity of giving 1,000 shekels to one poor person, or every day to walk by that poor person and give him 10 shekels, it is a better mitzvah, a higher level, to give that poor person 10 shekels every day than one lump sum of money. Now, I imagine if you ask the poor person, what would you rather have? The poor person would say, please just give me the 1,000 shekels now. I really would need that money. I could do X, Y, and Z with it. But the Torah states specifically that it's better to give small amounts of the same amount over time. Because as you give, every time you reach into your pocket and you pull out money and you give of yourself, you change yourself. And as you change yourself, you begin to change the world. And tzedakah, maybe more than any other mitzvah, has this transformative power of changing us into giving creatures. Instead of looking at our own self-interest, in our own acquisitions, in our own self-aggrandizement, it's saying, whatever I have is not really mine. I'm here to give to the other. And it changes us from within as it changes the world from without.
So I'll tell you, you've sparked a few memories that I have, and it's making me feel a little self-conscious because I think maybe I'm a little too self-absorbed lately to be as aware as perhaps I think I used to be when it comes to tzedakah and giving money. I used to walk around with one of those film cases. You know the film cases? I guess I'm dating myself here that I was around before.
The black little
the little
cylinders?
black cylinder film cases. And I would have them filled with half shekels. And everyone that came up to me, it doesn't matter, I would just give them tzedakah. I would just give them a half shekel because of the act of giving. It was a good thing to do. A lot of people come up. And, I think it would be good for us to actually get into some of the guidelines like you just said. I was actually not aware of that you said it's better to give over time the same amount than one lump sum.
Indeed.
I would really want to look into that. I'm not doubting you, but it's sort of a shift for me. I don't think that there's necessarily a quantitative summation of that. Meaning,
Well, the Rambam just lays it out. What is better, this or that?
is it over a year's time? Is it over 10-year times? What if the person needs it now? I think the concept, okay. The concept, I'm sure that there's truth to it. I would just need to understand that balance. But I remember that I used to go into, makolets. And, I used to go in, I would go to makolet, to the little grocery store, and I would say to the guy, he would have 2 shekels to give me back change. And I would say, you know what? Just put it, if you could put that in the tzedakah box for me. Because I would give tzedakah very frequently, and I thought it would be a good thing if he puts the tzedakah in. It may perhaps help him with the act of giving the tzedakah, so let him do it. But I remember there was a time, I haven't thought of this, I think since then, it was a makola guy, and he had like earring on, tattoos, didn't look like a religious guy, and he owed me 3 shekels, and he didn't have it in the register. So I'm like, you know what, it's okay. When you get it, give it to tzedakah. He's like, no, I can't do that. That's too much responsibility for me. I'm like, what? He's like, what if I forget? I can't do that. He was like so afraid that the 3 shekels of tzedakah would be in his
And this is the tattooed earring guy.
responsibility. Yeah, and he was too afraid that he would forget to do it.
I love that story.
Beautiful story, right?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, so, there is one idea that's happening now in Israel that Ari and I are getting ourselves slowly but surely involved in. And I read about it for the first time about a week ago. And as soon as I read it, sparks went off in my mind, captivated my imagination. I wrote an article about it in the Jerusalem Post. I immediately called the head of the movement. And what they're doing is something truly remarkable, marvelous, borderline miraculous, and as they're reviving an ancient commandment in the Torah that's been all but lost for thousands of years and trying to transform the concept into a modern economy. And that is the idea of Shmita. In just a few more months, the sabbatical year will be upon us. Every 7 years, the Jewish people are commanded to not work the land. Now, back in the day, everyone worked the land. Everyone were farmers. And once every 7 years, the Torah mandates, stop working, go on sabbatical, go learn, go pray, be with your family, be with your community. Stop focusing on material and start focusing on the higher values.
Sabbath of the years.
Yes, it is the Sabbath of the years. Now, one of the elements of this sabbatical year is an idea called Shmitat Ksafim, which is the annulment of debt. Now, I in my life have given loans to about 3 people, not a lot of money. I don't have a lot of money, but people have come up to me over time and asked for 1,000 shekels here, 500 shekels there, and I've given them loans.
And when you give it in your mind, you're saying this very well may be tzedakah.
Yeah, it's pretty much like, I'm never going to get this money back. And lo and behold, I've never gotten the money back. And I don't mind because that was my write-off to tzedakah, and it's not a problem. But within Jewish construct of society, every 7 years, any debt that you've been given is actually annulled. And it's not that the person now has to feel bad that he hasn't given me back the debt, but that in fact, Shmitat Kasafim, there's an annulment of debt, and every poor person that needed that loan gets to start anew. And so society started falling apart, and people stopped giving
like
debt.
That would cause it to fall apart.
This is what happened. And then, of course, Hillel HaZaken in the Mishnah instituted pruzbul, which was a special contract that you were able to sign with someone that said, listen, although there is this Shmitat Ksafim, we are sort of bypassing that and allowing us to continue this transaction. Otherwise,
it was a mechanism
to save it. But the mitzvah still is intact. You don't have to do pruzbul, but there is a way around it in case you don't want to fall into that trap. But what is the idea? The idea is that once every 7 years, the poorest of the poor should have the ability to start anew, refresh. They're drowning in debt. They can hardly make ends meet. And it's giving them an opportunity to, like, clean slate every 7 years, start afresh. And so now an initiative that was started in Israel that's being backed now by the government of Israel is as follows. They're trying to raise a lump sum of money of, let's call it $1 million. The government then is going to match whatever money is raised. Now we have $2 million. Then the government of Israel is going to the banks, and they're going to select about 10,000 families in Israel that meet a certain criteria. The father and mother are working, so it's not that they're just living off of welfare. Right. They have children. There's like a certain amount of criteria that they have to be passed, and they're then going to negotiate for this family an annulment of debt, where they buy the debt from the bank. Right. Because now, listen, now it's interest on these loans. When you're in debt in the bank, sometimes in Israel, you're at 16% if you're just in minus. Yeah. And so they're now going to take 10,000 families, and with about 10 different economic rehabilitation organizations, Dave Ramsey-like organizations that teach people how to budget their money, how to build finances, how to work. After they go a year of studying how to never let that happen again, as the prize at the end of the Shemitah year, 10,000 families are getting their debt bought 20 cents on the dollar, and 10,000 families get to start anew. And when I heard about this idea, I said, most times when you give tzedakah, organizations have to take overhead for the secretary, for the building, for the cost, for the logistics. And really, 80% of your money goes to the poor person. Now you give $1. The government is matching it to $2 and then is buying their debt at 20 cents on the dollar. Your $1 is turned into $20.
Let me tell you, that is where all of my money would go.
It's unbelievable. Ari and I met this woman who initiated this idea just a couple of days ago. We're getting involved. I can't imagine a better tzedakah project than this, meaning most of the money that Ari and I have raised in the past has gone towards Jewish education, spreading the idea of consciousness, unifying people from different backgrounds. But there are those who really love to give to poor people, and they would love to give to the poor people in Israel. As far as I can tell, aside from reviving an ancient Torah commandment, bringing it into the 21st century, there is no project in the world where you could get such a bang for your buck.
And let me tell you, in my mind, that is Or Lagoyim. That is being a light unto the nations on a economic fiscal level. It manifests in many different ways. But that's a perfect example of the nation of Israel infusing within, on a governmental level, on a societal level, Jewish values that the testimony of the beauty is the action itself, meaning anyone in the world that would hear this, I can't imagine would be anything but inspired. I can imagine governments around the world following suit.
Absolutely.
But we don't need to go pitch it to them. We just need to do it ourselves, and simply share with them what we're doing.
Exactly.
Say, this is what we're doing.
Well, listen, folks, if you guys want any more information about this, you can write me and Ari at jeremy@thelandofisrael.com, Ari@thelandofisrael.com. Thank you for joining this week, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you. Shalom, shalom.